So in their case, it started off superficially as a fairly simple gig. Only one back office system. So I take the premiums and the claims from Transactor, I load them into a data mart, happy days. Now, of course, that doesn't take into account the bad data stuff, which we'll come on to. But at that stage, it seemed like a fairly straightforward gig. But then obviously we encountered things like earned premium calculations, which to do right are actually somewhat complex. And I'm not convinced that many people are actually doing them right in the market at the moment. And I'm certainly not convinced the back office systems are doing them right. I'm pretty sure they're not. But hey ho, we got the information in, we cleansed the information. Ultimately, we've got now this feed. But then when Gary's team started looking at it more from an analytics point of view and their needs started to mature, because once they were trusting the data, then what do? You start asking more questions from the data. We then find that the level of granularity in the Transactor application didn't really lend itself to real claims analysis. So what was the thought process? The thought process was, why don't we go back to source? So what we're doing at the moment with Gary's team is we are doing exactly that. We're swapping out the claims from Transactor to Gallagher Bassett. So now we can bring in a much higher level of granularity that allows us to do much more dimensional analysis around claims, which we couldn't do if we took it from the core TGSL application. But it does mean to say, it comes back to the point I made this morning about when you need to think from a user or a business owner's point of view, what are you trying to do? You need to even think, do you have that information? Because we and they, it's easy to glibly assume, isn't it? Well, obviously you're going to take all your data and you're going to stick it into the main back office system, so we'll have access to all of that. Not true. Not true at all. So if I look at the insurance analytics data issues, I gave you a generic slide this morning, but these are a couple of ones that, one based on PwC, which I really think is ridiculous. They said only 28% of insurance execs are worried about the quality of their data. If that's true, then most insurance execs are living in some parallel planet, because I think that should be higher to 80%. I've not found, be honest, we have not found one company we've dealt with so far where the data is good, despite assurances that it is. And that's not because of negligence on behalf of the companies, of course it isn't. It's to do exactly what Gary was saying. It was like we didn't realise the extent of EDI. The only reason we found out there was so much bad data in Walsingham's is I hold my hand. I used to do, my first job was to do triangulation statistics using Tipex and a paper book for CT Bowring's just across the road. And I could remember the reason why it was called a triangulation report was because it was a triangle. Even I could remember that amount of detail. So we looked at Walsingham's triangulation report. It's not a triangle. There's data in all the bits. So I go back to my guys and I say, this is ridiculous. We've done something wrong here, guys, because there's just no business scenario that supports what you've got in numbers. And of course there was. And that's how we got into this whole area of looking at data errors much more thoroughly. This thing I would say is a bit of food for thought. And funny enough, without any prior consultation on this one, Gary's already said this. I was talking to a guy last week who's worked in insurance MI for 15 years. I'm sorry, he's worked in finance in MI for 20 odd years and insurance MI for 15. And I said to him, I've got to be honest, I'm really surprised. Why do MGAs not care about getting earned premium calculated properly? I don't get it. Because I'm really not sure you do. And I want you to argue with me on that, because I want you to care about it, to calculate it properly, because we're in a good place there. But it was interesting what he said. He said, I've only worked in banking MI and insurance MI, and if I contrast the two, the differences are easy. In banking, if we're going to change a business process to get more revenue or income affecting operations, the process affecting operations in MI are assessed and costed, and then whether we do that change to generate more income is as simple, does the income increase justify the actual cost and risk to the systems that support it? Now he said, I can tell you the answer, because insurance is nothing like that. In insurance, the answer is business changes just happen as opportunistic business, and it is assumed the systems will just cope. And when the shit hits the fan and the systems break, everyone blames their IT provider. Now, I'm not saying that's the case on the transactional side, because I think both in Antillo's case and Walsingham, they've certainly got very good grounds to be unhappy with the transactional provider. But as I said to you in the opening session, we did a lot of analysis recently for a company who weren't allowed to write anything other than annual policies, and we find then reasons why our data doesn't match with theirs is because there were zillions of 10-month policies that they weren't even allowed to write in the first place. So that's kind of important. So I'm not trying to take a pop at the insurance industry because I want to be part of it. So, but it is a warning there that I recognise that. If I'm really honest, from the companies we've dealt with so far, I couldn't disagree with what he said there. Okay, so if I look at Gary's system, obviously we said our front end sits in Excel. So if I go across to my demonstration, I think Andy in his session pointed out that if you look at a blank Excel spreadsheet, from file through to help are all the ribbons that Microsoft give you and you love, and then you've got our ones marked EIB that allow you to do different stuff depending on what you're trying to do. Now, for people developing reports, this is heaven. For people who are just consuming reports, this is hell. Why on earth would you want to come into, I had comments in the early days when we used to operate from here and you do file open and open the spreadsheets, and FD would go, why do I have to see all this Excel crap? I understand none of it. It's totally meaningless. So the way Antillo and the way Walsingham access our application, of course, is not like that from a user's point of view. They click on an icon. That cranks up Excel because everything we do starts and ends in Excel in terms of the actual front end. But what this is doing is actually connecting to our server, and it's going to our gallery on the server and requesting a menu that's been personalized to the whatever set of users. So this is obviously changing Walsingham's business, but in those days there was fleet business, there was non-fleet, and I'm just going to go into the non-fleet. And we kind of call this Fisher-Price MI. You kind of get an icon, you touch on the icon, it draws you a report. It's pretty simple stuff. So I'll go to that famous report that really was, I guess, the date in May that Gary was alluding to. This was the big win for us in terms of when we first produced this report. We thought, what the hell is going on? Because there were numbers there, there were numbers there, there were numbers there, there were numbers there. Stuff that obviously anyone in insurance knows is actually impossible from a business perspective, but it's not. And we'll come on and show you why that's the case. But this is the triangulation Gary's talking about. So we've got a nice triangle here. One of the things I find fascinating is everyone seems to want to call written and earned premium something different, and that's fine. So in Walsingham's case, they call it WGNPI. And of course, if we want to then change that to earned premium, I've got a list of all my metrics here. Now this will obviously compare the income metrics, which will now be going forward from Transactor, versus the claims metrics, which will obviously be from Gallagher Bassett. But obviously as a user, I couldn't give a toss. I'm not interested in any of that. I just want to pick the metrics that interest me and look at the information. So if I want to flip between WGMPI and EGMPI, it's as hard as clicking that, and it will then obviously go away and refresh the data. Obviously the totals stay the same, but the profiling will obviously change based on what Gary was saying in his presentation. Now, of course, I think it's fair to say that really when you started on this trip, it was this sort of information you were trying to produce at a company level that then you could then pass back internally and externally. But of course, I was talking to, I think, a couple of guys briefly over coffee break, is that the trouble with all this stuff is whenever you give her a report at a high level, it never really tells you the answer. It just gives you 10 questions to want to ask from that report. So, here, for example, you might think, well, hold on, how is this broken down by age? Now, if I double click on age band here, these age bands don't exist in the underlying Transactor or Gallagher Bassett system. So the EIB App Studio backend is actually building these groupings for you. And not only are they building them, they're actually putting the parameters in a spreadsheet. So if next year a carrier comes back and says, 21 to 24 is wrong, it should be 22 to 27 and then 28 to so and so, then in this case, Walsingham could change those parameters and it will reprofile the entire application. They don't have to come back to us and ask for that. So if I want to see the taxi driver's age between 25 and 30, it's as hard as pressing that button there, and there's my 25 to 30. Now, if I want to see the 25 to 30s in London, then that's not too bad either. I just bring up the dimension here for a location. So you start to get the idea. It's quick, it's reliable, and this is based on validated data. And you can change the underwriting year, as you'd expect. You can also change the time view. One of the things that we notice in insurance, and again, please correct me if it's not applicable to you, but we've seen that everyone seems to base their cumulative numbers on a year-to-date basis. We're not really, but of course, when you're looking for anomalies, a lot of the time it's actually easier to spot the anomalies on an in-month basis. So you can flip from the underwriting year-to-date to the current period, and now you're going to see the in-month values coming through now. So you've got totally different profiling there of the individual months. So again, if you imagine you're thinking and looking at claims, you might suddenly have a spike, whereas if you're looking at a row, yes, if you're looking along the line, obviously you should be able to see a spike, and probably you'd put it in a graph to make sure you did. But it's a lot easier when you suddenly go into an in-month view, because there's a noticeable difference in magnitude as you go through. Okay, so this is just obviously one report that they're looking at. From there, you can do things like, Gary, in his description of an MGA, basically said, obviously, it's when you look at the money coming in, less the money going out in terms of claims and recoveries and so forth like that, then ultimately the gap in between is hopefully your profit. So one of the things you can do here is I'm bringing up now a dashboard where we're overlaying written or earned premium onto total incurred. So here we've got the recoveries that are underneath the line, because obviously you get them back. You've then got the paid claims added to those to get to here. And then if you settled all your outstanding, your worst case incurred position is going to be here. So good news, making a profit. And again, I'll change this. This may or may not be true, but if I want to say, okay, but let's have a look at that for a particular broker. So now if I look at all my brokers that I'm dealing with and I flip that to someone like Flux, then I can look at that and kind of say, okay, if we negotiate well on our outstanding, we can still make an underwriting profit. If it all has to be settled, we're making an underwriting loss. Yeah. Now, not only can I do that against earned, I can immediately, I thought, Gary's point about the illustration with the claim coming through at the point where you've only obviously earned perhaps 30–50% of your written premium, you can actually see effects of that, because if I flip that back to written, then obviously you get a completely different profile, where obviously most of the written is going to come in the first 12 months, and generally speaking you're losing a bit of money through MTA's cancellations going through the rest of it. But you can see instantly the comparison between the two. And we have about 200 different dimensions here that Walsingham could choose, but obviously, you've got to be careful when you're designing reports, because it doesn't really help if I said, oh, the good news is, down to about half the page, there's 200 attributes, and the good news is you can change anything. You wouldn't be able to change anything at all, because you wouldn't even be able to take in what you're changing. The magnitude is too big. So it's important that you think through each report from a user's point of view of what sort of things would we want to know from this report. Not because the technology can't do it, we can add in as many of these as you like, and we can add them afterwards, so you don't have to get it right from day one, but you don't want to just stick everything in there for the sake of it. That, I find, is also a common mistake with MI. A lot of people tend to do that. They think, Christ, if I get asked a question, we might not have that. Or just stick everything in. And then you actually make the problem 10 times worse, because then no one can use the application, which is not good. Okay, any questions so far? Does that make sense? And you can also go further here. You can do NCB banding. So if I now wanted to have a look at, now I'm looking at what? I'm looking at Adrian Flux, and I want to actually have a look at performance where everyone's got 2 years NCB, then again, that's a good place to be. It's not too bad. So you get the idea. It's nice and easy to move, and you can always go back to the underlying source of that dashboard, where you can now see all the information, and it's synced. As we go across this report, you notice it's already on Adrian Flux. So if I now click that and change something else to, I don't know who else has got Bollington. That's not a good choice. There you go. So I've now changed obviously the broker here, but of course if I go back to the dashboard, as you'd expect, that is naturally kept in sync with your analysis. Okay, so you can go through, and I think both Gary and Craig mentioned about being able to slice and dice the data in any way. So we've been looking here where we've been selecting one broker. Here we've been looking at the top 10 non-fleet brokers, and if I go back to the source, I've now got all the brokers now, and I've got every piece of business profiled now over Walsingham's underwriting year. They run a December to November underwriting year, so you can see start through December through to November. And of course, one of the things that will happen is you will then go through into next year from the same underwriting perspective. This again is one thing I found where a lot of BI tools fail, and I won't lie, it's caused us a few issues in terms of getting our heads around that, is when you're looking at time periodicity where year-to-dates now are going effectively infinite. If you're looking at a long runoff, your years never end. They just keep going up, and you have more year-to-dates going across that, where I guess your premiums freeze and your claims gradually increase or decrease based on settlements. Okay, if I now look at it from another idea, I could obviously then look at that purely from a regional point of view. So now we're flipping it a completely different way, whereas we're now looking at regions instead of brokers. But again, I've now got a breakdown here across the months. Now, one of the things we're doing for 2018, so this isn't available to Gary and Craig at the moment, but it will be soon, is what happens if you think people are going to ask questions from that report. You know, if you think, okay, I'm looking at a location here, but I'd want to now break that location down by broker. Now, obviously, what you could do is say, well, you pick the other report, come out of this report, go to the other report, but you've lost your context there. So one of the things we can do here is if I right-click on any of these, I can say I want to perform an action on this data. I want to analyse it by something else. So this is the Walsingham cube of data as it stands. So this is everything we can analyse by. So I've got the business broken down by business type. I've got the policy. I've got lots of attributes on the policy that I could break down. And if I come down here, I could say, I know what I want to do. Someone might ask a question of, how is that region broken down by NCB banding? That might be. How is it broken down by product? And I might want to then look at the actual transaction itself and say, well, I might want to break it down by broker. I had a broker in the previous one, but what happens if I wanted to break a region or a time period down by broker? Now, if I hit close, and I'll show you this without saving it away, but if I save it away, the next time I open the report, it would look exactly like this. But difference would be, if I right-click on East Midlands here, can you see all these things? This is what we're calling train of thought analysis. I've now got analysis by NCB banding, analysis by product, analysis by sub-agent. So if I pick by sub-agent, that now is going to freeze time, because we picked East Midlands, which was in the rows, and it's now going to go across and analyse on a completely new report. It's going to build a new report for us on the fly here and analyse that in a second or two. And there we go. So now I've gone from flipping that now by broker, but what I could also do is I could go along here and I would say, okay, I get the brokers now. I'm back to actually the report I had before, but I could pick any one of these months. Maybe I want to pick February. And if I right-click again, it remembers all that. So now what I want to do is say, actually, I want to break broker down, but I want to freeze February, and I want to break it down by NCB banding. And now it's immediately gone and done that. So this is really, really powerful stuff, because if you are in a meeting and someone asks you these questions, it's not, oh, do we have a report for that? I don't know, I'll just design one. However easy it is to design a report, it's still a pain in the bum. Isn't it a lot nicer to have a lot of those there where you can just do those on the fly? So this is a big thing, we think, about doing moving into 2018. And you'll see that it's frozen February here, but you could say, well, actually, February was a mistake. I didn't really want to do that. I actually wanted to see it for the entire underwriting year. So if I click now, everything's interactive. I'm now looking at it for the entire underwriting year now for breakdown by broker, by age band. Now, again, you could save these reports down. You could actually say, you know what? These are not in our standard pack, but actually, we really should have that because that's quite an important report. You just save it back. It's there. You're done. Now, this is what I kind of refer to as the intermediate way of building reports. You know, there's a lot of people in organisations that would like to be able to do stuff like that, but perhaps doesn't want to go to the full author where you can actually drag anything to anything because they just see it as being too techy. I don't have the time or the understanding to do that. This, I think, is a really nice halfway house. And of course, because they are new reports, you'll see as I close each one, they're totally independent. I'll be paged back through the reports back to the original report. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Good. Okay, now the other thing I think Craig and Gary talked about, obviously the carriers and their need to provide a pack of reports. So everything we've been doing so far is around we're running a report and it's producing it and we can change all the things. But the carrier's going to go, yeah, but that's not really what I want. I just want a static pack of reports that gives you all that breakdown. So if I go into this single vehicle monthly MI pack now, you'll see that this takes a little longer to run because instead of running one report, This, I think, is running 7 reports, and it's synchronized them all by the month. So in other words, if you want to move from one month to another, if you think traditional spreadsheet systems, what do? It's a pain. You probably take every spreadsheet and save old month away to current month, and then you try and replace the data in each one, and hopefully all the formula still works. Here, you're doing one thing. You're double-clicking, changing month 1 to month 2, done. Send it to the carrier. So if you look at it now, we've got even the actual thing itself is nicely packaged. They've asked for it by age, they've asked it by NCB, they've asked it by product, they've asked it by cover, You click on any one of those, there you go. There's your breakdown now by age. There's your breakdown by NCB. There's your breakdown by product. There's your breakdown by cover. There's your breakdown by gender. There's your breakdown by broker. There's your breakdown by region. Now, I think you have got to ask yourselves, for the people in the room not using EiB Analytics, how long would that take you? Because I suspect it would be a bit longer than that. And that's really, really nice. And here you'll see that it's synced. Here we're doing it actually on an underwriting year because all the stuff is based on trend. So if I double click on underwriting year 213-14 and change that to 214-15, that looks like at face value it's just changing a value here, but actually what that's going to do is going to ripple through and change every one of those sheets. If I want to run it for another year, I've now done that. So now when I go through that, I'm now looking at 214-15 underwriting year, exactly the same. And that, I hope, is what I kind of refer to as looking at kind of the real world issues here. You know, we're not just trying to provide one-off reports. We're also trying to think as the MI app as a totality, where you do have to serve other people and perhaps have to provide packs to other people rather than individual reports. Now, one of the things I don't want to dwell on, but I'm going to mention anyway, is I did say about this thing with earned premium. One thing I think we're doing well on this is we are going through all the calculations needed for earned premium. So when we get MTAs, we're obviously earning them from the current point they happen to the end of the year, but also when we're getting things like cancellations, we're obviously recognising all earned premium then up to that day because there is no legal liability beyond there. If we get a reinstatement, then obviously then we reinstate back to the rest of the policy. But, and a big but, bad data kicks in. You know, we had some transactions from different companies where we have a cancellation, a reinstatement, a cancellation, a reinstatement. Well, what business logic do you want us to apply to that? Yeah, that's quite hard, especially if they're not in the right order. And that's where we have to be careful again on how do we process the erroneous data.
Sorry, can I just ask,
you can.
ever doing this in pounds or will there be multi-currency?
No, funny enough, one of the MGAs we're working with at the moment is a full multi-currency, multi-product, which is a pain in the bum, but we are doing that. Yeah, no, we are. But funny enough, we was having a brief conversation with the guys at White Oak over a coffee. Is, you know, the whole multi-line of business stuff, which I think Nico's going to talk about in his session first thing here this afternoon, is obviously puts in a lot more complexity because obviously there are basic dimensions like broker and measure and time underwriting year that's probably going to be the same. But obviously there are going to be then various attributes about the line of business that are not applicable to the other line of business. In fact, I think Gareth is in the room. You've got exactly the same thing there as with your stuff as well. Okay, back to the sexiest bit of all, which is really boring, but it's really, really important. Error handling, yay. So rather than looking at all those reports by brokers, wouldn't you rather be looking at the data errors report? But this is an important report. So this is broken down into 2 tabs, a risk and a claims error. And what we're doing is we're just taking the data from, in Gary's case and in Craig's case, it would be from TGSL, and we're actually just putting the core things we found. So what we've done is, for those of you interested in the technology, as we find errors, we reject them and we write them to a SQL database, which is an error log. Then with our report, we read the SQL database, so we've got a list of all the errors. As we actually output the errors, we then do a lookup to find out why the error has occurred and what should we say to the company who's running the reports, why that error has actually occurred. And that error logic can be built in 2 halves. It can be built on generic industry knowledge, i.e. even with my very, very limited knowledge of insurance, I kind of know a claim can't happen before a policy starts. Or it can be based on actual companies' business knowledge. So in Walsingham's case, there was a few transactions that happened before the 1st of December, which obviously you weren't allowed to write business before then. So they either have to be test data or erroneous data. It's one of the two. But of course, we wouldn't know that from just looking. There's nothing we can do by just looking at the data saying that must be an error. We wouldn't know without, in this case, Gary telling us. So if I scroll across here, you'll see as we scroll across, we get to the interesting bit. So here we've got exactly that. Policy started before the 1st of December. That's not possible. We've got a cancellation without an adjustment date. Now this is the thing I find very interesting, because this is a very, very common error message we're seeing in people's data. So if that's the case, how are you calculating earned premium? And on what basis? Because isn't earned premium based around a date? The fundamental point of earned premium is a date, because if you don't have a date, you can't calculate it. So what the hell happens there? So we have to reject that, because that's then not going to allow us to tie up properly with the profiling of the data. You know, point that Gary raised, an MTA with an adjustment date before the policy started. You know, so you know, we'd like to obviously all think these are not possible, and you know, I think Gary's point, I think in his first or second slide, where he said, "Good news is it's not just us." I can actually vouch for that. As I said, I have genuinely not found one company we dealt with so far that hasn't got errors in their data, and quite a lot of errors. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we just have to apply them. So you've got here, cancellation applied to the year before renewal. And even stuff where we're using specific logic here, where we're told it's a test policy, we can identify that in a certain way, then again, we can obviously reject that. Again, ask yourself back, I guess, to the transactor in this case. Surely they would have cleared test policies before making you live. But you know, again, whilst that should happen, we can see again that it doesn't always happen. And then we do exactly the same on the claims. So you've got the claims information going through there, but then obviously when you go here, you've got a different set. You've got an incident date here that was 12 months after the policy start date, and they're writing annual policies. You've got the one that I guess you'd expect with EDI. You've got a claims coming in where there's no matching policy record. That's probably a bit more understandable. So this is important, and the reason why it's important is because this helps provide the audit. Because in the one hand, I've helped Gary and Craig by rejecting data. On the other hand, I've hindered them. Because anyone going to their core underwriting system, if it said they wrote 20 million, they did write 20 million. I'm telling them you wrote 18 million. So now you're into a real problem, because now the MI is different from your operations. And operations is right, in quotes, at that level, because they have done 20 million. So it's kind of important that we actually handle that. So we obviously then again have a report for that. There's a report for everything. And this obviously now just actually provides a breakdown. This is again quite important, because it does actually just do a check on what we're doing is sensible. So what we're doing here is we're querying our data cube, and we're also querying the extract from Transactor and actually contrasting the two. So this nice one line, that is from Transactor in this case. That is from the cube we're looking to drive the business. So we're saying there was 42 million's worth of raw data, but at the time it was all cleansed and processed, there was only 40.9 of valid data, which thankfully matches that there. And out of that, there is still 108,681, which should then be reflected in those error tables that I've just shown you. So there is a complete audit. This is the MI that's right. This is the number that we actually did, but we just can't allocate it at the moment because the data's wrong. Here's the difference with the errors in it. I can live with that. That's quite good. There's a full audit trail in place. Okay, any questions so far on that? We've got about 7 minutes before we wrap up. Questions?
Some of those errors look as if they're just data entry errors at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Well, I'm not so sure. I'll leave these guys to comment, but I think Gary hit the nail on the head that our experience most of the time is when it's done through electronic data interchange. Because there you've got a third party that perhaps hasn't got the validation of the system, and they're trying to process something quickly, and they're saying, well, do you know the date of that? No, I tell you what, I'd key in this date. Yeah, it seems to take it. At that level, it's okay, but of course when it then ripples through to the MI, it's not okay.
Well, just pick up on that, we've got a third party provider for claims, and they type certain bits of information in when they take the claim details, and they might just put a 0 instead of an O, or the opposite way around, so that would error it out, and we simply just look at the report, send it across to them and say, can you just correct it, and the next day it'll be correct. We can pick up on the errors quickly, rather than having to go, if we waited a month, we'd have to then go and change 30 files with that error in there at the handler's place. we can pick up really quickly and deal with it quickly.
And one thing that we're looking at, which again, we definitely, obviously from talking to Craig and Gary and also anyone else, obviously, who's interested in the software, we'd love to now move on to the more interesting bits, because this stuff is good. It does help you run your operation, but it's not where we want to be. We want to look at now side of how do you add value to that. And one of the things we actually did here, and I'm afraid this is not really based on meaningful data, but a couple of things came out of our conversations actually with Calpe about ideas for things. One of the things that most BI products don't handle, which we started looking at, is the traditional, I think one of our customers called this the Lloyd's triangulation report. So we were looking at one triangle in a certain way. This is a slightly different derivative of it. This is actually the stuff I remember after raking through my records of many years ago of producing, where you're actually putting years relative to each other. So this isn't actually a point in time. It is month one for that underwriting year, month one for that underwriting year. So you're doing a like-for-like comparison here, and then you can pop in the indicators that you're interested in. Now, this is a bit more of a harder report to produce, but it does have context in there. You can't do this very easily normally with any other BI tool, because they don't really naturally work that way. Again, you can pick any broker, and you can also be a bit more selective on this. You could say here, perhaps I don't really need the actual third underwriting year there because there's no data there, so I can dynamically suppress it. Actually, I want to put it back in, but I want to change the month to month 24, and now I am starting to get more information going through there, and I guess if I make it long enough, I guess I should, if there's any data in there, start getting data. So you're obviously here, your triangulation is you're always going to be 12 months out because you're comparing like for like, month with month comparisons. So now I guess the thing I like about this, you are genuinely comparing month one for each underwriting year. Are you getting better? Are you getting worse? Which for some things is quite useful. The other thing that Calpe offered, which again is the sort of thing we want to kind of start exploring, was they were talking about, and again the data doesn't really lend itself great here, but they were talking about we wouldn't know what pricing changes were made by a Walsingham or an Antillo. But if you were making dramatic changes from one month to the next, you'd probably want to think, did life get better as a result of making those changes, or did it get worse? So you almost want to compare the runoff of key metrics against how is it on a like-for-like basis. So here what we've done is we've allowed you to pick up to 4 dates, and by default they're run on a relative basis, i.e. as they actually happen in real life. So they're obviously the distance between each other. That is a comparison to that. That is the first month of that month. That is the first month of that month. But what Calpe was saying was, wouldn't it be good if you could change that to comparative? So rather than having the true months, you have as of month one. So as of month one for that date, that was the performance. So if you look at a runoff of over 24, 36 months, you can kind of say, did we get better or worse for making those changes? So I guess the obvious thing to look at is, did we get more premiums, but our loss ratio went through the floor, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's the stuff that we want to get into, or derivatives of that, because then I think we really are starting to add value. But as we all said, it's a step-by-step basis. You have to get there a bit at a time. Okay, the final thing I'm going to leave you with, and then I can't believe this for once in my life, I think I'm going to actually be on time, 2 presentations on the trot, my colleagues will never believe that, is if you want to roll that out to the web, this is now using Power BI on exactly the same data here. And this now can obviously be available through any iOS device, any Android device, but you're querying the same data. So the thing I like about that is you take earned premium. We are doing some serious calculation stuff in the engine to work out earned premium. Now, it wouldn't help if I said, oh, you can do that in Power BI, but for those of you who know Power BI, there's a language called DAX. You've just got to write the DAX now to actually regenerate our earned premium formula. You've got no chance of doing that. And why? Now you're doing it in 2 places. We don't have to here, because here Power BI just points at our model. We've already calculated earned premium. Earned premium is no different from written premium. It's just a metric, it's graphing. So that's where we get the return of centralising the business logic that I was harping on about this morning. But very similar thing, I can go and change that obviously to Greater London and so forth, and it'll ripple through. But what is useful, and we haven't had time to do this, is where, I don't know if you remember from seeing Andy's demo on the hotel thing, where Power BI is better is looking at the cause and effect stuff. You know, you can highlight different areas, and you could actually say, if I touch on here on this broker, it will show the effects on all the other things. So I touch that broker, it will show how much that broker contributed to the other areas. That's where it is extremely powerful. You might be able to do that here actually if I touch on NCB. Yeah, if I touch on NCB banding 2 there, it will actually show the effect of that actually by sex of that NCB banding. Everything is relative. If I looked at that particular thing for which is female, then again you can see the female equivalent on each one of those other areas. So you can actually see the cause and effect on different parts of your business actually far more effectively than we can do with our Excel tool. Okay, covered quite a bit there. I hope that was useful. I think in terms of wrapping that up, as I said, we want to move on to the areas that I was showing at the end, the adding value. And again, I really would like your views on that. If you can think of what are the sort of things we want to see in this, what could, if we analysed our business in a certain way, would it give us more competitive edge? And I think both Gary and Craig have gone through how they see the benefits. I think we've kind of been similar here, but this is our view on what we think were the benefits from doing this. One of the things that I think I was talking about again, which I think is really important, is this reduction on MI person dependency. Because I think it's true both in Antillo and Walsingham's case. In your case, you are the MI person. In Gary's case, it was Steve. But if you guys weren't in, without a system like this, then MI just doesn't happen, and that really is criminal.